Welcome to the Reading with Robin podcast. My guest today, Lori Gottlieb, and I last spoke with her about her book, Marry Him, A Case for Settling for Mr. Good Enough. And how long ago was that? Was that 4 years, 5?
Oh, no, it was many
Longer?
more years than that.
Was it many?
Yeah.
Okay. I might have been at the radio station then. I don't know. It feels like a long time, and that's why I was so excited when I heard there was a brand new book out called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, a therapist, her therapist, and Our Lives Revealed. Lori is a psychotherapist and New York Times best-selling author who writes the weekly Dear Therapist advice column for The Atlantic, where she's also a contributing editor. She has written for the New York Times Magazine and has appeared on Today, Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, CNN, NPR, and the aforementioned Reading with Robin show. Lori lives in Los Angeles, and find her on her website at lorigottlieb.com. Find her on Twitter and on Facebook. And welcome to Reading with Robin, Lori.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
So looking forward to it. Of course, I just want to ask you a million questions. That's all. You know, in reading this book and the title, from the title to the cover to the discussion and the way this book came about and just everything about it, it couldn't be more timely, more topical, and it's thought-provoking, hilarious, just what I needed, and I will be putting this book into so many hands. I am so excited to share it with my audience. It's just perfect on so many levels. I couldn't have loved it anymore. So congratulations.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. Thank you.
Well, it's just, I was like overwhelmed reading it and just thinking about we'll talk about how you got the idea for it and, you know, that first glimmer.
Yeah, so the book is behind the scenes of the therapy world, but from two perspectives. From me as a therapist who's helping people get through their struggles, and me as a patient who's struggling. And so I take people into my therapy room, and I also take people into my therapist's therapy room. And I want to show that we're all more the same than we are different.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we'll probably talk about the more specifics of who I'm following, but, you know, the people in the book all seem very different from each other. And I think that people will still see themselves in many of the characters, and I'm going to call them characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in many of the patients, because I think that we're all dealing with the same essential questions ultimately.
And it's really taking the honest look at, what people are thinking and what people will share and reveal. And I think that was one of the things that I found so interesting about this book, because it certainly opens up so many topics and conversations. And ultimately, I think that getting people to talk about all sorts of things, you know, so that there is no shame or stigma or any of that attached to things. Just the more we do it, the more that lessens, and the healthier, hopefully, everybody becomes. So books that get conversations started are just one of my favorites. You know, certainly love my fiction, but more and more nonfiction with a narrative are the books that I'm drawn to. So Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. It came at just the perfect time.
I really like what you said about stigma, because, you know, I think that we put so much more value on our physical health than our emotional health. Mm-hmm. And I see, you know, if somebody has chest pain, they're gonna get it checked out before they have a massive coronary. But if somebody is feeling depressed or anxious, they are somehow, a lot of people minimize their feelings. They think, well, you know, I should be happy. I have nothing to complain about. I have all these good things in my life. But you can't just will away your feelings, and what happens is if you try to pretend they're not there, they just get bigger because they need air. And eventually you'll have the emotional equivalent of a heart attack, and you don't want to wait that long to come to therapy.
And that's the thing about bringing the bottom up. And I could ask the question really rhetorically of, like, who should be in therapy? And I don't know anybody that wouldn't benefit. And how is it possible? I just believe so strongly in it, why there aren't more people in therapy. Or maybe they are. People don't always talk about it. And you know, that goes to the the idea of stigma, and I really love the chapter where you talk about finding a good therapist, and then who do you ask? And then if you ask somebody, they might think, why are they asking me? Or what are they going
to do? And when you're looking for a therapist, why did you think to ask me?
Right. Why are you asking me? What do you think? What is that saying? What do you mean?
Right. And then if you ask somebody, people might say, well, why? What's wrong? Are you depressed? Is it your marriage? And even if they don't, the next time you're with them, they might be thinking,
they're totally thinking it.
Is she depressed? Is it her marriage? But I think the thing is we're all struggling with things like that. And people just won't talk about them, and that's what makes them so isolating. That's what makes us so afraid to talk about the normal things in life, because we think that we're in the minority.
I agree, and I can only imagine that social media has exacerbated that to a point of everything looking so shiny and beautiful, even down to the orchestrated accounts that are meant to look messy, but in a neat, messy way. So
right.
I mean,
my colleague has a theory, and her theory is that and I think she was kidding, but I'll bet there's some truth to this.
Always truth in the kidding, yeah.
Her theory is that when people start posting these really romantic photos and Instagrams and Facebooks of their relationship or marriage,
party's over.
All of a sudden, 3 months later, we're going to get the announcement that they're splitting up.
Always.
That's her theory.
Yeah, and I agree with her theory, and we have a theory here in Rhode Island, because anytime somebody had a special birthday party, a 30th, 40th, well, back in the day it was 30th, 35th. a month or so after, that was it. It was like the final hurrah, or it's the third child, or something like that. And, you don't wish that on anybody, but it seems you can see a pattern, or it's a new house, or just some distraction sometimes. Go to therapy. Save the money on the house. Spare that child.
I think that the difference between what people imagine other people's lives are like and what they're really like is what I'm showing in the book, because this is what people are really dealing with, and these people are not so different from the people who are going to be reading the book.
So relatable.
I think that's so normalizing, because it's such a relief to know that other people shoot themselves in the foot and keep ending up in the same place and they can't see their blind spots, or other people have these patterns, or other people have these difficulties relating to other people or themselves, or other people beat themselves up and are unkind to themselves, or other people, are confused about their lives, or they have regrets, or they want to know how to love and be loved. And I think these are all really, normal questions that people have, but I think the image that's out there is that everybody's got their lives together. And we know intellectually that that's not true.
The sense of getting stuck in what the perception is. And when stories are told, the idea of storytelling and community and connecting through those stories, you do see, I can see myself in so many of the different stories. And you talk about your patients or characters, as you just called them. And I don't know if this is optioned, because I certainly could see it on the stage.
It's been optioned by Eva Longoria.
Oh, well, there you go. I didn't know that, but it reads like, it's very visual, and just, I guess, because of the humor and the way that the book was broken up and your stint in Hollywood and all of that, that makes sense. So that's very exciting. I didn't know that. So
yeah, I think it lends itself well to a TV series, because I really want to portray this world in a much more realistic way. I think on television and in movies, there are kind of these two tropes of the therapist. There's the therapist who's the blank slate, the cold, removed person who's saying, who's like robotic, right? And then there's the other trope, which is sort of the train wreck who, outside of the therapy room, she's a train wreck, but inside she's competent. And neither of those reflects any of the therapists that I know. I'm sure there are people like both of those stereotypes.
Right.
But the reality is that therapists are just normal people. And I tell this story at the beginning of the book where one of my colleagues she and her husband were trying to have a baby, and she kept having miscarriages, and she was in a Starbucks when her doctor called to tell her that the pregnancy that she had at that moment was not viable. And she burst into tears in Starbucks, and one of her patients walked in and saw this and kind of made eye contact with her, left, and never came back to therapy.
Oh, that's such a normal response. And I don't know, right, what is that perception that there, the therapist has it all together? I mean, we are people, everybody.
Right, but right, and I think that the interesting thing about that is that if that had been my therapist, of course, I wouldn't want her to take that call in the therapy room. But the fact that she had a normal reaction to something would make me trust her all the more, because
I think so.
I would feel that she could understand my struggles, that she understands what it's like to be a person.
It's all timing, though, right? It was reminded me of the episode of Curb where Larry sees his therapist on the beach in a thong. I don't know if you watched Curb.
I don't remember that one.
Yeah, and then I just happened to have rewatched it. Richard Lewis is in that one. Richard Lewis lets the therapist know. That's why Larry's not going back. Anyway, it was this whole pretty funny thing, as you can imagine. And seeing people outside of the office, and depending on your community, I mean, it's, you're going to run into people.
Well, I think I'm showing both sides of it. And I think, though, that when you're in therapy, it's very strange running into your therapist in another context, because it's almost like when you're seeing your first grade teacher in Best Buy with her family, and you're like, wait, you don't sleep in the classroom and you wear cutoff shorts on weekends? You're kidding. It's like, I think that people would prefer that we sort of, sleep on the couches in our offices.
That's so true. That's funny.
And don't see us out in the world. And it's uncomfortable for both people, I think, because they've revealed a lot about their lives, but we haven't revealed anything about ours. And so, I could be out in the world with my child or, with whomever, or doing something or dressed in a certain way that I wouldn't necessarily want my patient to see, because, it could bring up all kinds of feelings. But we'll talk about it in the room after. I mean, that's the beauty of therapy, is that you can talk about anything the next week. And so it's the patient who didn't come back sort of lost that opportunity, the one with the Starbucks.
They did. And then what's really tricky is, of course, or not so tricky, but what that says about the person, or what their needs are and the expectation they have for the therapist. This is something that you start knowing there'll be an ending to it, even when somebody's not in your life. In either iteration of not being in your life, they're still in your life in some way. Or as a therapist, do you imagine like a different ending?
I think of that from two sides. One is that I think for a lot of people in therapy, they haven't had the experience historically of having good, positive endings in their lives. Endings have often been abandonment, or somehow leaving them feeling bad, or they haven't been discussed, and they don't really get resolved. And so I think we want to be really conscious of having positive endings with our patients. So there's making that ending positive for them and making sure that there's a completeness to it. And then there's the other part of it, which is what happens with us, because of course we think about our patients sometimes, even after we've stopped seeing them. And we don't get the ends of the story. Sometimes people will come back for various reasons, or what we like to say, for tune-ups. But if they don't come back for a tune-up, we don't really know. Sometimes they'll send you holiday cards, and, but it's a holiday card, so you don't really know the reality of their lives. But it's nice. We do form, I think it's the one relationship in life where you know from day one that you're going to form a very intimate relationship with somebody, and that it's going to end.
It's just such an interesting dynamic, and I love what you talked about. Well, you can set up the way the story goes, and then when you find your way to Wendell, and that a friend suggested that you go talk to somebody, and someplace where you could really unload. And that's, I don't know if that's something people really understand about. And I have a lot of friends who are therapists, and I've been in and out of my life different times. So, it's something that's very personal to me and important, and something I share with friends and sharing with the audience now, apparently. It's just totally cool. Because there's so many feelings that will come up. And I feel like I'm in session. I'm talking to Lori Gottlieb, and we are talking about her brand new book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, a therapist, her therapist, and our lives revealed. It is the most winning of combinations, mixing storytelling and truth-telling. And this is a book to put on your list, share with friends, pick it for your book club. If you don't have an interesting discussion at this book club, you're never going to. I think it's.
We actually have a book club guide. It's up on my website that the publisher put out. Yes,
that's awesome. So it's at LoriGottlieb.com, and there's a book club guide that helps. I know book clubs really love to have some direction, and that will. I'm going to check that out. And when I post this, I'll include that. It's a perfect pick, and more nonfiction, and like I was saying, books that keep us talking. So, I was talking about Wendell and a friend suggesting that you go find somebody. So what was that process like?
It's really important to find the right therapist, because study after study shows that the most important factor in the success of your therapy isn't the therapist's training or their number of years of experience or what modality they use. All of those are important, don't get me wrong. But what's most important is the relationship you have with your therapist. And so I think it's really important that when you go in for your first session that you know that it's a consultation. Most therapists I know, including myself, we set up the first session as, hey, why don't you come in, tell me a little bit about what's going on, and we'll see, we'll see how we feel after that, meaning, whether I'm the right person to help them or they think that they feel comfortable there. And if you leave the session and you feel understood, that's a good sign. If you feel like, this person understands what I was talking, they're not going to understand you in depth in a first session, but just you felt understood, you felt comfortable talking to this person. So we set up the first session as a consultation, which is about coming in and talking about what's going on and seeing how that goes. And we therapists, it's not like a first date. We don't mind if you don't want to come back. You don't have to hide or ghost us. You can just say, hey, I'm not sure, or I don't know if this is the right fit. We get it. We want you to go to the right person. We don't want to waste your time. And you need to feel comfortable. This is a really important process that you're going to be going through, and you need to do it where you feel like you click with the person.
Yeah, and I think I could see where it's uncomfortable. It's not like you say going to other appointments or going to a hairdresser or this idea of ghosting, or breaking up with your, after the first appointment, or just yourself, you kind of get that sense of this feels good, and that would be a first good, and that's important, to share. Like, how do you really know you're in the right place, and how far down a path do you go, because you're really trusting a lot. And I know in the book you talk about feeling relief and defensive all at the same time. If somebody's telling you something, they're looking at your situation and you're feeling those things. And then I think, well, how do you know if they're right? So how do you know if your therapist is on the right path?
Yeah, I think a therapist is there to hold up a mirror to people in a way that people in the outside world won't, because I talk in the book about the difference between idiot compassion and wise compassion. Yeah. And idiot compassion is when you want to make the person feel better, and so you support their version of the story, even if you may have an inkling that they have a role in the story too. And so it's trying to protect their feelings, but it's actually more harmful than your honesty would be. Because if wise compassion is delivering a compassionate truth bomb, right? A compassionate truth bomb. And the thing is that I think out in the world it's harder to do that for your friends because their expectations are different. And when you come to therapy, a therapist is going to be very skilled at helping you to see something that might feel sensitive to you or vulnerable to you. We don't want to make you feel criticized, which is how you might feel if someone in the outside world says that to you. And so, we have a lot of experience helping people to see themselves more realistically, because once you can see yourself more realistically, you can see how sometimes you get in your own way and you can move more smoothly through the world, not just in the one situation that you're mentioning that day, but in multiple situations. We're reflecting a different version of the story. So, my background as a writer, interestingly, comes in very handy in the therapy room, because I feel like sometimes I'm an editor sitting in the therapist chair, that I'm editing the story. When someone comes in, it's like their first draft. And for them, it's their millionth draft because they've told themselves that story for years. You know, I'm unlovable, I'm not worthy, nothing ever works out for me, my husband is the problem, my mother's the problem, you know, whatever. There might be truth to all of those things, by the way, you know, about other people being the problems. But also your response to it might be the problem in terms of how you've chosen to react to these people. And so I'm looking not just at their story, but their flexibility with the story. Can they consider another perspective? Can they consider another point of view that they may not have examined before? Because the story that they're in has kept them stuck, and we want to get them unstuck.
I think that is one of the biggest takeaways from this book, and in reading everybody's stories, and you talk about different patients, as you were saying, back and forth with your own story, is guiding somebody to edit their story. I really loved that. I love so much about this book. I could.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I could literally talk through every page in this book. There are pearls of wisdom and aha moments, and the funny interspersed. And just, do you do the audio version? Is there an audio?
There is an audio version on Audible.
Okay.
And I don't do it because I'm not an actor. But yeah, there's an audio version, and it's fantastic.
Because I would think, I don't do audiobooks. That's not my preferred method. But I would think this would be a really good one to listen to the stories, and it would like really sink in. And I just think there's so much to this book, the topics that it covers, and I put it down. I picked up the tissues. I mean, aptly, there's a tissue box on the cover. It's a perfect cover. Does it come with little tissues, or no? I didn't get little.
Well, actually, we had little tissue boxes with. It's going to be sold in Costco, and my joke was they should sell it with Kirkland tissues.
Absolutely. That's no joke. That's some serious product placement. It's fabulous, and it's Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb, a therapist, her therapist, and Our Lives Revealed.
The feedback that I've been getting just as we just started to launch is that now that people who are not my editor are reading the book, which is always an interesting experience, so many people have made this comment. They said, I needed two things when I read this book, tissues and a highlighter. And I felt so gratified by that because I felt like it's almost like I hope the book can serve as almost like a therapy session.
The tissues and the highlighter as the pairing is perfect. Well, I dog-eared a whole bunch of pages, which is my own personal way of highlighting. I like to move into a book, and this is a book to move into and to share and to talk about these stories. Do you want to just talk about maybe one or two of the patients of the and also how did you? I know in the beginning you talk in your author's note about certainly hiding distinguishing features or morphing people, or I got to think that that's a really it's a difficult thing to do in memoir or in nonfiction, but especially in this topic, and it appears to be done with so much grace.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to talk about some of the patients. And also I was just thinking about something else you said, which was this question of truth, right? I think so many of us are holding secrets that we feel like if people knew the truth of who we were, that we wouldn't be loved or liked. And when people tell me their secrets, it's so funny because sometimes the secrets they seem so mild to me. It's kind of like it's this thing where they've told no one, and then I'm waiting for the build up,
the big thing.
And then it's like something and they're so ashamed of it. And
the shame is very driving of a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, I say in the book that Carl Jung called secrets psychic poison because they're so corrosive, but also there's so much about shame. And I think if we really examined, why we're keeping these secrets and what we think will happen if we, reveal ourselves in our truth, so much happens that's good, that's positive, but people just are so afraid of revealing themselves. I was going to say there's all these different kinds of secrets. There's the secrets we keep from the world, right? And then there's the secrets we keep from the people close to us. But there's also the secrets that people keep from their therapists. And then there are secrets that people keep from themselves. And in the book, you can see so many of the patients are keeping secrets from me, and I'm keeping secrets from my therapist.
Don't you think that's the most fascinating thing? I mean, in a place where there's truth-telling and it's safe, even there, and you could tell, right, when you're talking to somebody that there's something else going on. And you talk about cyber-stalking your therapist and altering your story because you found out things about him.
Right. So I Googled him, and I found out that...
Oh, Googling, I call it cyber-stalking, sorry.
It pretty
Google
much
stalk,
was. I spent a few hours on it.
Sure.
And, you go down the internet rabbit hole, and I found out that his father had died at a relatively young age of a heart attack, and I had talked a lot in therapy about my very close relationship with my father in his 80s. And all of a sudden I felt chagrined by that. I felt that I would be causing him pain by talking about my close relationship with my father, who is still alive, and especially because I was talking about how I was so glad we had this time, because my father is in very poor health now, and I was so glad we had this time, and he didn't get that time with his father. And so I started editing myself in the therapy room. And I know that people Google me, too, because they're editing themselves also.
Isn't it wild? It's like exhausting.
It is exhausting, but I think we're doing it because we have very good reasons for doing it.
Yeah.
It's just that we think they're good reasons, but they're actually getting in our way.
Well, and if you think about, years ago in therapy, you wouldn't have known anything because we have access to all this information. And so there's the good and the bad of all of that. And like we talked earlier about people presenting themselves in a certain way and what that, the domino effect there. So when you know things, or maybe within a relationship with your therapist, things are revealed, you remember something, then you edit yourself. I mean, I remember finding something out about my therapist. Well, she told me. But then I remember thinking when I wanted to share something else, then I didn't want it to seem like a judgment on her.
Yeah, we say it's all grist for the mill, meaning what we talk about and what we're afraid of talking about are all important to bring to light in the room, because it's not just about the relationship with your therapist, but whatever you're doing in the therapy room, you're doing outside of the therapy room too. So eventually, even if you're on your best behavior with your therapist, which many people are at the beginning because they want to be liked, and there's this almost performative aspect to it where, they want to portray themselves in a certain light, consciously or not. They might not even be aware of it. When I would leave my therapist, I'd see somebody in the waiting room and think, does he like her sessions better than mine? And, I think they're just very human feelings because you feel very close to your therapist. And so I think it's important that when people, whether they hide things from you or maybe they reveal too much too soon or, whatever their dynamic is, they're probably doing that outside. But what's nice about doing it in the therapy room is that it's a very safe, warm place to kind of say, hey, let's look at this and let's see what that's about, because it might be causing problems for you out in the world.
And you talk about somebody comes in with one story, and that's not necessarily, there's something that brings you in.
The story that people come in with is often a red herring, meaning, whatever the issue is, it's often symptomatic of something else that led them to this place, that got them to this place. So we will help them talk about what happened or, why they're coming in. And I always want to know not just why are you coming in, but why now? Mm-hmm. Why this week did you decide to call me, even though the problem existed 6 months ago, or, that kind of thing. What happened now? Because that shows me about readiness for change. I'm always looking for signs of readiness for change. Because we can't change you. You have to decide to change yourself. We can help you and guide you, but you're going to have to ultimately do that work.
The work.
So we're often, we end up talking about why they came in, but we usually discover that there's something, a struggle related to that they need to work through that's more important than just that one thing, just more than one, that discrete story or issue that they're coming in with. And so we work, quickly to get to that deeper place so that they aren't spending a lot of time on this thing that might be symptomatic of something else.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating, right? It's like, I'm just going to come in and tell you this one little thing. I'll be here for 2 weeks. You'll hardly know I'm here. And then it's right years later because there's so much. And I think, talking about secrets and shame, and maybe that's built into our DNA. I mean, generations back it was, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It's nobody's business. Don't tell anybody, So it isn't that many generations past all that. And I hope that we're getting closer to truths, our own truths, and living more authentic lives. And
I think it's about right, and I think it's just about being more intentional about how you go through your days and how you want to spend your time. And I think some people get really trapped in their heads, and it's debilitating. So I hope that it doesn't scare people away when they think about, they may know a friend who's been going for years and they think, I'm not signing up for that.
Well, that's a whole other story.
Right. But you don't have to sign up for that. So I think what happens in the therapy room is that a lot of people, so many heroic things are happening in there. People are being vulnerable, or they're making changes that were really hard to make, or they're taking risks that they couldn't make even, a month before, and no one else sees that. And I think to help people appreciate the heroics of just getting through your day and doing it differently, even though you've had decades of doing it a different way that was, causing a lot of problems in your life. That's a really important thing that you can get out of therapy. And therapists nowadays, I think, are very open about talking about what are the patient's goals, what are they there for, and that might change over time. They may think their goal is one thing when they come in, and then they start to, other things happen in their lives, or they have a baby, or, they get married, or they get divorced, or they go back to school or go back to work. Different things happen, and the goals change. But I think it's very important to be aware of what the patient's goals are so that you're on the same page. And there are certain people for whom therapy is something that they want to do longer term, and they want to do that deep characterological work.
And I think that you talk about this in the book about putting the relationship on pause. I mean, I'm not going to get to that. I don't want to, no spoilers, and I don't want to ruin anything, but I love that metaphor and just the reality of sort of no goodbye, or putting it on pause, or leaving the door open. And I think that's a beautiful way to sort of wrap up the whole relationship with a therapist, and with the self-discovery and making change, and just being open. And it's just, I could not love this book anymore. I'm so excited to see it out in the world. And it's, maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist, her therapist, and Our Lives Revealed. Read it with tissues and a highlighter, apparently. I love that. I think that's great at book club. Everyone can put the highlighters out, and go to LoriGottlieb.com. There's a book club guide, and visit her site to find out where she'll be, because she'll be all over the place in New York, D.C., Boston area, New Jersey, West Coast. And before I let you go, what are you reading?
I just reread, actually, Mary Piper's Letters to a Young Therapist.
Oh, great one. Yeah.
Which is, again, one of those books that seems like it's not inside therapy. I think that, like, some of the best writers who also are therapists, and Mary Piper also has this great new book out called Women Rowing North, I think.
Yes, it was wonderful. I have.
Yeah.
I love everything.
And she had written Reviving Ophelia.
Yeah.
And she's wonderful. But this is something that I hadn't read in a very, very long time, and it's so much about the human condition and life. And like my book, I hope it's not just about therapy, even though it takes place around the therapy world. But she's wonderful, and that's what I was reading on the airplane as I was flying in today.
Nothing like airplane reading. Train reading, airplane reading are like some of my favorites. This book is relatable. There's something for everyone. It is, again, thought-provoking and heartfelt and very funny. I love it. It's just wonderful. I'm thrilled to speak to you and share this book, and it's, maybe you should talk to someone. It is just a winning title, a winning book. Thank you very much for sharing this time with me. I think, is our hour up? I love the scene in the book where someone's looking over right at the clock. I think that's where you open. Is that the first patient you talk about, and he's looking at the clock, or he's, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, he looked over my shoulder, yes.
Very funny.
He wanted to make sure he had enough time to
get a story
continue his monologue, yes. But he's the person that I think you come to love most in the book, right?
Absolutely, absolutely lovable. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you say in the book, most people are likable, or there's something to like about. Right? Talk about
right. So my supervisor had said, I think a lot of us have questions. I don't know if you want to include this, but you can.
Sure.
I think a lot of us have questions about, before we become therapists, what if we don't like one of our patients?
Mm-hmm.
And a supervisor said to me, there's something likable about everyone. It's your job to find it.
Wow.
And I think that, and then I thought, well, but not everyone. Not everyone, right?
That's what could take years.
When somebody shows you their humanity, when they're vulnerable with you, when they tell you about their childhood and their dreams and their desires and their formative experiences, you can't help but come to like that person. You can't help but come to even see aspects of yourself, even if you're very different, in that person. And I think that's what connects us. And I think ultimately this book is about connection. It's about how we grow in connection with others.
And we're much more alike than not. And that point is definitely illustrated in the different patients that you share their stories and your own. And it is a gift of a book. And thank you so much, Lori, for being on Reading with Robin.
Thank you, Robin. It was such a pleasure.